Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my greedy neighbor encroached on my private property and tried to steal a football field-sized plot of land from me. Here is what happened, let's dive right into the video. I had a neighbor that was a sneaky son of a gun and tried to steal land from my family without us even being aware of it. I'm not great at measurements and I know that a lot of people are just as bad as I am. Our land is around the size of a football field, so I'm gonna be using that as an analogy for some parts of my story. So these neighbors were pretty trashy people that my family never wanted to have much association with. I grew up and was told not to play with their kids because everybody that did ended up getting hurt. We are talking like a 7-year-old being given a BB gun with no safety instructions and told to just have fun. They grew up thinking that they were gods, and the oldest one inherited the property about 8 years ago. For a little while, it seemed like he may have grown up and acted like a responsible adult. It did not last, and soon his true colors came through when he would constantly try to mess with my family and our land, telling us that we were doing everything wrong and that the land was gonna be wasted because we were not using all of it. That part was kinda true, because despite having the large amount of land, we were only using a small percentage of it on things that would make us a profit. We just did not have the desire to expand, especially with my father getting older. None of us realized when the neighbor decided to start slowly moving into our property. When he built a new shed, we had no idea that it was actually on our side of the property. Things were getting planted on our side and it was just such a slow, gradual thing that we were almost blind to it. Going back to the football field, imagine over 3 years he went 10, maybe 15 yards into our property, just very slowly. If he had stopped, he would have actually stolen our land and gotten away with it. Instead, he had that god complex to fulfill and got a little too big for his own good. There were some trees on our property that he was getting close to. We knew for a fact that those trees belonged to us. They were all the way on, say, the 30-yard line of the property. One day we heard noises and saw that there was a lot of sawdust in the air. We went over to see that he had a company tearing down all of our trees. Me? Whoa, stop, what are you doing to our trees? Worker, your neighbor hired us to tear them all down. He said it was his property. Me? Well, it's not, so you need to stop right now before you destroy anything else. Did you even think to look at a map of the property before just chopping everything down? I know he might not be the right person to go off on, but I was really angry and he was the person actively doing it at the moment. Worker, yes sir, I was shown a property map that said this was on his side of the line. Of course, neighbor chose then to show up and telling me to stop harassing his workers before he called the police on me. Screw that, I was going back to the house and calling the police on him because I knew for a fact that these were my trees. The police came, but they saw his paperwork that he must have faked and said that I would need to go to court for anything further. And yes, you can bet that I was getting a lawyer and suing him for everything I could get. It might seem dramatic, but those trees had a ton of memories of my siblings and my parents. Playing and laughing together, just seeing them get torn down, and not even by the landowner. I called and got a real property assessment so I could argue it in court against his fake one. So that was when I learned that he has been slowly inching his way into our property for years already. I was beyond angry, and since my dad could not handle a court case, I was allowed to appear as a stand-in for the landowner. Meanwhile, my neighbor showed up with confidence for some stupid reason. The one thing I know about egos is the harder it comes crashing down. I never met an ego bigger than his. We both showed our assessments to the judge, and of course, mine was the only valid one and stood. Neighbor claimed his was done by a legitimate assessor, but it had no paperwork or signatures and he could not even remember the name. Keep in mind, this was all a civil case, so charges for anything he did was not during this. This was so I could prove it was my land and get compensation for it. Judge, how much are you asking for him to pay you? Me, $200,000. That's the estimate for the trees that he cut down on our property. We also want his fixtures removed from the land. Neighbor, there's no way those trees are worth that much. He is just trying to get rich off of me. Judge, you were aware that it's not your land when you started constructing buildings and cutting down trees. Neighbor, they were not using the land. It was just sitting around doing nothing, so I made something out of it. I added value and that should cover the cost of the trees. Just because we were not actively using our family land does not mean that it still didn't belong to us. We had not sold any of our land until the day that happened. Nobody was allowed to touch it. We were granted the full amount we were asking for. As for the removal of the shed and the planted stuff, I had to wait until criminal court ordered him to do that. It was just a very long and annoying mess. I won't give any kind of suspense if he was found guilty of knowingly encroaching to obtain more land, illegally building the shed lying in court, etc. A lot of charges, but all of them minor enough that he was not gonna spend any time in jail. However, that does not mean that he didn't get some just desserts, and that came in the form of where he was getting the money to pay me. Well, if you don't have the cash to pay somebody in court, then you need to either sell some assets before the court does it for you. Instead of his land getting bigger, it ended up shrinking as he had to sell off some of the land to the neighbor on his other side to get enough money. You can also bet that I was building a fence on the property line so he would not get any more dumb ideas about trying it again. A dumb kid that grew into a dumb adult. I still wish that he would have done time in jail just so he would be out of my hair. I knew that if his parents were still alive, it might be the time they actually told their son off for anything. Losing some family land was an embarrassment, and he probably will never hear the end of it from the rest of his family. And yeah, ripe stars, I hope this neighbor never tries to steal land from another neighbor again, and I hope he learned his lesson, but then again, you can never be sure with entitled people, they usually never learn their lesson. Either way, if you enjoy the stories about entitled neighbors, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that helps me tremendously in regards to defeating the algorithm, which currently gives me a lot of issues once again. The next one is a malicious compliance story. To start, this is not malicious compliance against the Japanese police, as it is against a customer from hell. Oh, and if the police are called to a dispute, they won't take sides unless a law is broken in front of them. So, just to make it clear, ripe stars, this story happened in Japan. Anyway, that is for the courts to sort out. They just keep the peace, talk to the two parties and try and work things out. So on to the story. In 1990 to 2008, I was a club owner in Japan. I rented the place from a rascally old man who let me do pretty much what I wanted. The club had a motorized mirror ball hanging from the ceiling, a pool table, and the projector there left over from the former renters that the landlord said I was free to use. I had made a lot of money using the downtime. A club is usually wasted space during the day, setting up party space type events. After weddings, reunions and the like, here is an actual picture of one of the sit-down type events. The tables would disappear at night and you then have a dance floor. So one party got a little rowdy, and during festivities the crazy host lady thought it was a good idea to pick up a chair and swing it over her head. Don't ask me why, she was very drunk. The arc of the swing launched the mirror ball into the air, smashing to the floor in 1,000 shiny pieces. After my staff cleaned up the broken glass, she promised to pay for it, and I thought that was that. I jumped online, found a like model on Amazon Japan and added the price to their bill. I don't remember the price, but being motorized put it up past $100, with non-motorized versions selling for much less. About 3 hours after, a very angry host lady's husband shows up, receipt in hand, saying that I scammed the drunk host lady and he was gonna call the cops and shut me down and ramble. Our back and forth went on for quite a bit, and honestly, I was getting a bit tired of his macho in-your-face attitude. He then said he would also talk to my landlord and get me evicted. I was at the eye-rolling stage and sarcastically said, "Oh, don't get him involved. You will regret making him mad." Unfortunately, sarcasm does not translate well in Japanese, and he jumped on my humor gaffe to say that I was threatening his life and then called the cops. The cops were totally professional, but a bit overzealous in responding to the call. 3 patrol cars and 2 bikes showed up. I guess the dude made it out that I was in league with the mob, and I guess gaijin, which means white person Japanese, plus yakuza in the 1990s to 2000s means overkill. They listened to us together and then they separated us and got each side of the story. Then, just to be sure, the police talking to each of us switched places and asked all over again the same questions. Slowly the cars, one by one, went back to work, leaving only 2 motorcycle cops with us in a back and forth argument. All very tedious. Finally, one of the cops pulled me aside and said, "Look, he's willing to pay for the damage, but only if you apologize for threatening his life." Being American, where we see lawsuits everywhere, I was very reluctant to say such a thing, so I walked back to the man and the police and I asked everyone, if I apologize for getting him frightened, this whole business is done, right? Angry man has his arms crossed with a macho smug "Yeah boy, say you're sorry" look on his face. The two policemen are also waiting for me to speak. I'm really sorry, really so sorry that you get scared so easily. Had I known, implying your weakness, I would have chosen my words more carefully. Damn, if extremely polite Japanese cannot turn into a slap in the face. The dude turns beet red, and I swear to you, the policeman on the left let his guard down just enough to let the corners of his mouth twitch into a grin just for a moment. Then the policeman said, "He did as you asked, now time to go home," and they herded him to his car. And the next one is an Am I the A-hole story. This issue started when my wife left for a week for a girls' trip. The kids are all in school and I took over as the main caregiver when she was gone. It all went well, and when she came back she asked if I had any trouble. I told her no, and everything went smoothly. So this started as an argument about how I thought it was so easy that she was a stay-at-home mom. It was not a good time and I already was pushing her to go back to work part-time since the kids were in school. We have talked about her to start looking around summer. The issue now is that I work from home twice a week, and every time she sees my screen or I complain about work, she tells me she can do it. I've talked to her about it and nothing changes, that if she did it, it would go smoothly. I thought back on our argument and I've asked her about it. She denies it has anything to do with it. So she won't stop, and I had enough of it today. I was trying to figure out why there was an error in my code. She saw what I was doing and told me that she could do that. I told her to go ahead, made a copy that she could work on. Well, she tried for about 5 minutes until she gave up. I reiterated that if she can do my job, find the error. This started a huge argument about making her look like an idiot, and now she's not talking to me. And yeah, ripe stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is OP the a-hole here or not? A comment said, "Not the a-hole, it sounds like she expected the house to be falling apart without her presence because her role as a housewife is so difficult that a man could not possibly do it himself. The fact it went so smoothly for you has probably pissed her off because it's proven that the workload at home actually is not so huge that it prevents her going back to work, and now you both know that." Comment number 2, wifey sucks for leaving you as the only breadwinner when there's really no need for that anymore. Drop the back and forth of "my job is harder than yours" and ask her flat out why she's refusing to go back to work. That is why she is pissed off at you being able to handle the kids, because she's trying to maintain the idea that looking after her school-aged children is a full-time job, which it is not, and she's doing that so she doesn't need to get an actual job. You are both there to look after the kids, you are both capable of looking after the kids. She does not need to devote all her time and energy towards that like she would when they were babies. Time for her to move on to something else. And yeah, ripe stars once again, let me know in the comments what you think about that story. The next one is a malicious compliance story again. This happened to a friend of mine and someone who I have worked with for over 20 years. Let's call him Scott. This story always gets a laugh out of our group, especially since he does voices and acts out what happened. In the late 80s, Scott worked at a Burger King while still in high school. For the first few months, he always worked a late shift and business was usually slow. The owners were a husband and wife team who, as you can imagine, came down hard all the time on the kids working. For the most part, Scott did not have to deal with them outside them parking late and night with binoculars as they spied on the late crew to make sure they did their job. Then the summer hit, and with summer vacation, Scott was moved to the lunch team. He was not used to how busy it was and was a bit overwhelmed. His main job was on the fryer. He took care of the fries, onion rings and chicken sandwiches. The lunch crowd was really starting to build up that first day he was on the day crew, and the wife owner walks by Scott, looks over his shoulder and in a very harsh voice tells him, "Put down more fries," which Scott then does. A few minutes later she walks by again, even more agitated, and screams, "Put down more fries, we don't have enough." Scott puts down more. A third time she comes by and grabs him by the arm and pulls him around. She got right up in his face and said, "Are you some kind of idiot? I said put more fries down now." So Scott did the only thing he knew how to do. He filled every fryer with as many fries as would fit and loaded every single row with as many fries as you could possibly put down. Soon the basket held the finished fries was overflowing because he had so many. Well, the boss comes around, raises her hands in the air and starts screaming, "You had too many damn fries!" At which point Scott had enough. He picked up a mustard and ketchup bottle and squeezed them both right into her face and close and yelled, I quit, and stormed out of there. He said he was shaking so bad driving home and was worried the police would show up, but they never did. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say that is how you quit a job in style. That was an absolutely legendary move if you ask me. I absolutely hate abusive bosses. If you've ever been in a similar situation, would you have quit as well? Let me know in the comments. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. My wife Aria and I recently moved into our new home. She has always been in love with all things vintage, so a huge old house like this was our dream. We were lucky to find this place, especially for the price we got it at. One of my friends inherited the house from his grandfather after his passing, and he urgently needed quick cash. Selling it to us meant he could still come by whenever he missed his grandfather. The neighborhood that it was located in was also fantastic. Everything we could possibly need was located nearby, and the neighbors were friendly. Most of them at least. Of course, nothing is ever perfect. Anyway, it took us no time at all to figure out that our immediate neighbor was someone most people chose to steer clear of. She lived there alone with her Pomeranian that loved to bark at everyone. She was the type of person that would complain about a baby crying for 5 minutes because it meant her dog could not sleep. This was despite the fact that the baby was only crying because her Pomeranian spends half the day barking really loudly. In other words, she was what people refer to as a real Karen. Normally, I would have felt bad for how everyone went out of their way to make sure that they did not run into Karen, but I drew the line at anyone being rude to Aria, my wife. I usually ignore the odd looks we get for being a mixed-race couple. I cannot stand it whenever anyone is racist to her, despite the fact that she is the kindest soul I've ever met. When we first moved in, she decided to bake cakes for our neighbors as a sign of goodwill, but Karen refused to accept it, claiming her stomach cannot handle Mexican food. Aria tried explaining that it was just a regular cake, so her stomach would be perfectly fine, but she insisted that accepting food from a Latina was too risky. And yeah, ripe stars, by the way, I might agree here, it is too risky in a sense that the food might be too delicious and you don't ever want to eat anything else again. But anyway, after that incident we made it a point to stay away from her, but she made that very hard. A couple of weeks after we got settled in, I went down to the living room from our bedroom and almost had a heart attack when I noticed someone sitting on our couch. It was pretty late in the night and Aria was in bed, so it couldn't have been her. I approached the couch cautiously from behind, and once I got close enough I realized it was just Karen. The problem was that neither of us had invited her over. She casually had her feet up on the coffee table, and when I asked her what she was doing here, she nonchalantly informed me that she had to turn on a switch here and now she was just waiting for her pool to get heated. She then proceeded to get up and walk towards the main door, claiming it should be hot enough now. I was too stunned to say anything. Before I could come back to my senses to ask why she would need to turn on a switch in my house and what does that have to do with her pool, she was gone. The first time I chalked it up as a dream and let it go, but Aria and I ran into her a few more times at our own house. Each time she would just pretend like it was completely normal and we were the weird ones for thinking anything is wrong. The third time this happened, I could swear I locked the front door and double-checked. She had me questioning my sanity. Finally, I decided to go up to her house and ask her what all this was about. She told me that the previous owner had left her a key to the garage because some of the water line in her house began from ours. This did not make any sense to me, but she insisted that this was how the water pipes in old houses worked. I left even more confused than I was in the beginning, but that conversation felt so draining that I couldn't press her any further. I decided to ignore it and go about my day, but this proved to be a horrible decision at the end of the month. When we took a look at our water bill and electricity bill, we were dumbstruck. It was ridiculously high considering we were just 2 people. Additionally, we always made it a point to turn off lights when we don't need them, and Aria was passionate about conserving wildlife, which meant no water wastage either. It did not take us too long to figure out that the only other person who would tamper with our switches and water is Karen. We rushed over immediately to demand an explanation. She insisted that this is how it has always been. I could not understand why the previous tenant allowed her to steal his water and electricity for her heated pool when he got nothing in return. We tried asking the other neighbors about this, but most of them did not know that the old man living here before us was paying for Karen too. Lastly, we asked the elderly woman who lived opposite Karen, and it turned out that she was blackmailing him. The previous owner had inherited the house from his father, and he was not very well educated. Once his wife passed away and he too grew old, Karen convinced him that he had essentially committed tax evasion and that he could easily be sentenced to jail for this. It was true that he did not pay taxes, but he also was not making enough to be mandated to pay taxes. I called my friend who I bought the house from and asked him for as much information as possible about his grandfather. I even managed to get my hands on his old bill. Once I collected enough evidence to prove that she was exploiting the poor old man who lived here before, we took this straight to the concerned authorities. The fact that Aria's sister was a lawyer certainly came in handy. She helped us sue Karen for not just stealing our resources for her pool, but also for trespassing. The first thing we did was to get a restraining order against Karen. The next part of the case took much longer, but we had the support of everyone in the neighborhood. Somehow, each of them had a Karen story, and they were all internally glad that they would never have to deal with her again. Again, I need to reiterate that most people here were really nice, but even they could not deal with her any longer. It was not an easy case to fight against, but Karen's bad reputation flipped the tables to our side. It was impossible for her to hide the fact that she exploited a senior citizen any longer. Once she was finally locked up, Aria and I could breathe again, knowing that no one would trespass onto our property anymore without us knowing. And yeah, ripe stars, there we have it again, one of the things that I dislike the most. People taking advantage of others, especially older citizens. Absolutely despicable if you ask me. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.